You're listening to The Globalist, first broadcast on the 29th of July 2024 on Monocle Radio. The Globalist, in association with UBS. This is The Globalist, broadcasting to you live from Midori House in London. I'm Georgina Godwin. On the show ahead...
Ya es 29 de julio.
Venezuelan President Nicolás Maduro has won a third term, the electoral authority said just after midnight, despite multiple exit polls which pointed to an opposition win. There may be peace talks on the horizon for Sudan, but it remains the largest humanitarian crisis in the world. We'll have more details. In 99 days, the US will vote for a new president. We'll have analysis of how the race to the top job is going. We'll hear what measures the state of Michigan is taking in order to grow its population, and there'll be a roundup of the big news stories from Asia. That's all ahead here on The Globalist, live from London. First, a look at what else is happening in the news. Flights at Beirut airport have been cancelled or delayed, with Lebanon's Middle East Airlines saying disruptions are related to insurance risks as concerns rise that Israel and Hezbollah could engage in a full-scale war. Foreign ministers from Australia, India, Japan and the United States, a grouping known as the Quad, met in Tokyo today for talks expected to focus on maritime security and initiatives to build up cyber defences. And President Tayyip Erdogan said yesterday that Turkey might enter Israel, as it had done in the past in Libya and Nagorno-Karabakh, though he didn't spell out what sort of intervention he was suggesting. Do stay tuned to Monocle Radio throughout the day for more on those stories. Now, Venezuelans voted yesterday in the most consequential election in a quarter of a century of Socialist Party rule. President Nicolás Maduro, whose 2018 re-election is considered fraudulent, said before the poll that the country has the world's most transparent electoral system and warned of a bloodbath if he were to lose. There are 21 million registered voters in the country, and for the first time in a decade, none of the opposition parties boycotted. Well, I'm joined now by Chris Sabatini, who's a senior fellow for Latin America at Chatham House. Chris, many thanks for coming on the show. Results started coming out after midnight. What are they showing?
They're showing that Maduro won, according to their results, 51% of the vote to 44% of the vote. But of course, the question here is, and you quoted Maduro as saying they have the most transparent voting system. And in fact, they do if they actually allow it to be transparent. The way the system works is there is at the voting site, it's an electronic voting system, but after the voters vote, the system prints a paper ballot, which they then deposit that shows how they vote. And then those electronic votes are transmitted to the National Electoral Council. But we don't know, they're not showing their paper trail.
Right. So
there's a lot of question in that sort of seemingly transparent system.
Yeah. What does the opposition say about this?
Well, they will be protesting today. I can guarantee it. They're saying it's stolen, and they have good reason to think so. First of all, serious public opinion polls had the opposition candidate Edmundo González ahead over Maduro by between 25 and 30% of the vote, and you shouldn't gauge an election by the number of people they turn out on the streets, but just looking at the rallies, the opposition had tens of thousands of people at the rallies, and it makes sense. This is a country that, since Maduro's first election in 2013, the country's economy has contracted by 75%. So it just strains credulity that they would re-elect a government that had overseen such a huge humanitarian disaster.
So do you think there's going to be violence?
We hope not. The opposition's been saying that they will protest, they will take to the streets. The question is what the military will do. Maduro will try to suppress the protests. But there, the question is, will the military follow his orders? And it's not clear, quite frankly. There's a collection of private militias that are called the colectivos that will follow Maduro's orders. But the armed forces is seemingly divided, certainly at the level of foot soldiers and non-commissioned officers. There seems to be a fair amount of support for the opposition. And we even saw this during the campaign when they're given orders to disrupt the opposition campaigns and rallies. Sometimes they didn't do it. So, Maduro is going to have to be very cautious about how he orders the military to the streets, because they simply may change their mind and actually remove him.
What's been the international reaction so far to this?
Well, U.S. Secretary of State Anthony Blinken has questioned the results of the elections. President Gabriel Boric, a center-left president of Chile, he has questioned the election results. The president of Brazil has said he's waiting to see the actual paper ballots until they decide. But the truth is there weren't many international monitors. The Venezuelan government had disinvited the European Union. It had disinvited or actually refused to allow to come a number of former Latin American presidents. It had disinvited the former president of Argentina, who used to be an ally, Alberto Fernandez. So the only people that were on the ground with any credibility as election observers were 4 members of a UN expert panel whose report is secret. They only report to the Secretary General. And about 17 to 18 international observers of the Carter Center, hardly enough to be able to monitor all of the sites and engage in a real election observation. Supposedly, from what I just heard, the Carter Center left the country. They weren't allowed into the election commissions, and they packed up and left.
How much does it matter to Maduro whether he's internationally recognized or not?
This is always the question. Why do dictators have elections if they're going to steal them anyway? And it's a good one. I mean, I think it's a curious issue because, why he feels he needs international legitimacy when he's going to steal it and has repressed with impunity in the past. I think partially this was the Constitution, so he has to keep some fig leaf of constitutionality over his government. He wants to have people mobilized in the streets. But if he's going to repress, I don't know why he has the elections. The question now is, can he normalize his government? Can he send some signals to the international community that they have to deal with him, despite the fact it looks like he brazenly stole this election?
Oh, absolutely. Chris, thank you very much indeed. I'm sure this is a story we'll be following a lot in the next few days. That's Chris Sabatini there, and this is The Globalist. It's 8:08 in Khartoum and 7:08 here in London. For 15 months, civil war has been raging in Sudan. Nearly 8 million people have had to leave their homes, giving rise to the worst displacement crisis in the world. And experts warn that the country could soon face one of the biggest famines globally in decades. The military is blocking the United Nations from bringing in food through a vital border crossing. However, there is hope on the horizon. The US Secretary of State, Antony Blinken, says that the paramilitary Rapid Support Forces, or RSF, and the Sudanese military have agreed to meet for negotiations in Switzerland in mid-August. Well, I'm joined here in the studio now by the journalist and writer Kiki Mordi. Kiki, it's lovely to have you back here with us.
Thank you so much.
I wonder if we could start with the humanitarian crisis. What is happening to the people on the ground?
The situation has been so bad since last year. There's people on the ground. There's women who have been forced, girls under the age of 13 who have been forced into child marriage, women who have been raped. There's the looming famine that's, going over. People have been displaced from their homes and people have actually been killed. There's reports on the humanitarian crisis and how it's affecting the lives of people in Sudan right now. And, there's been talks of peace. There's been peace talks in the past. This is a new one. And this has a lot of international involvement and, there's dissenting voices. Are we looking at, finally an end to this war? Or are we looking at just, another way for the United Arab Emirates to, inject themselves into what is going on in Sudan right now.
Well, let's talk about the United Arab Emirates, because there's some evidence that's been revealed that shows that actually that it's very much involved in the war with boots on the ground.
Right, with vested interest as well. This is a classic case of taking advantage of, wars to. There's evidence, in fact, that both generals have exploited gold in Sudan, for the benefit of the UAE. I'm not quite sure what the long-term goal is for the UAE right now, but it looks like they're not stepping back with the continuous meetings and talks and even representation on ground within the armed forces.
So, this came about because some UAE passports were found.
Right.
And I wonder if it throws up awkward questions for the UK and the USA about how much they knew about the UAE's involvement in this conflict.
No, I think, if we want to look at history, we know that I think these things don't go on without at least some knowledge for the US, especially because of the level of intelligence that they have. But right now, I guess maybe the peace talks that have been set up in Geneva might just provide an insight into what do the West know and how much are they willing to share, how much intelligence are they willing to share, and how much how complicit are they in what is going on in Sudan.
Why can't food be delivered?
Because aid is a target for both the Sudanese army and the RSF, which is quite unfortunate, which, gives this war is already, horrifying, but this gives it, a different body language. It spells doom. It's reminiscent of what's going on in Gaza. It spells doom. It's like, when dictators decide to go the low, and prevent aid from reaching their own citizens, they're sending a different language on how they plan to run the country.
The Minister of Agriculture gave an extraordinary statement saying that there was no famine at all.
Well, this is like when the internet was turned off in the country, where they claim they're reducing international meddling, but it's simply just trying to shut down or trying to silence the media or trying to silence the voices of the people in Sudan. The people are saying that they're hungry and they're not getting access to aid, they're not getting access to food. And, we have the government saying otherwise, which is to be expected. A government that's capable of turning off the internet so that the citizens would not be able to share the result of the massacre that happened will definitely not miss a beat to shut down rumors, in quotes, of food people or citizens not being able to feed themselves.
You briefly touched on gender-based violence. I wonder if you could tell us more about that.
Yes, there's a recent report. There's been different reports, but the most recent from Human Rights Watch speaks on how horrifying the case is right now. They spoke to case workers, people who interact with women and girls, and between the ages of as old as 60 and as young as 13 have been victims of violent rape, child marriage, and they don't have access to rape kits, they don't have access to abortion. So some of these women are forced to come to term with their pregnancy, and it's quite horrifying. And to increase the impact of the violence that they face, sometimes these rapes happen in front of their family members. There's a case of a family where the mother and the daughters were raped in front of her husband and her brothers, and it is so horrifying. When they were able to reach the girls, one of them was pregnant already. And this is the case across the capital. And when asked who was responsible for this, they blamed the Sudanese army and the RSF as well, but majorly the Sudanese armed forces. And it's quite unfortunate how the sexual violence is one of the spoils of war in any conflict that you find on the continent or even in the world as well. I guess there is calls for the United Nations Security Council to publicly call on the warring parties to end sexual attacks, sexual violence on humanitarian operations. There is calls for, different, the United Nations Human Rights Council, the UN Secretary General, the African Union Peace and Security Council as well. They can't remain silent in the face of what's going on. There's famine, there's sexual violence. Something has to give at some point.
And how hopeful are you for these peace talks?
Well, I guess on the one hand, we have to be hopeful, but then again, this is not the first time that agreement has been made. It's not looking like there is a future because there is no unified voice. And I think there's too much international vested interest. And, you know what they say, too many cooks spoil the broth. There is no unified interest, so it's not looking too hopeful at the moment. But the body language of agreeing to speak is good, is a good thing at this time. So I think a lot of people are holding on to that.
Kiki, thank you very much indeed. That's Kiki Mordi there. Now, still to come on the programme.
Christians, get out and vote just this time. You won't have to do it anymore. 4 more years, you know what? It'll be fixed. It'll be fine. You won't have to vote anymore, my beautiful Christians. I love you, Christians.
This is The Globalist.
UBS is a global financial services firm with over 150 years of heritage. Built on the unique dedication of our people, we bring fresh thinking and perspective to our work. We know that it takes a marriage of intelligence and heart to create lasting value for our clients. It's about having the right ideas, of course, but also about having one of the most accomplished systems and an unrivaled network of global experts. That's why at UBS, we pride ourselves on thinking smarter to make a real difference. Tune in to The Bulletin with UBS every week for the latest insights and opinions from UBS all around the world.
This is The Globalist on Monocle Radio. I'm Georgina Godwin, and we'll continue now with today's newspapers. Joining me from Paris is Vincent McAviney. Hello to you, Vinny.
Good morning.
Are you having a fabulous time in Paris?
Oh, it is wonderful. The city has totally taken the Olympics to heart. Everything is working incredibly smoothly, and all the events I've been to, the rugby on Saturday, the beach volleyball yesterday, there is a real party atmosphere. The French have definitely decided that they're going to turn it into a festival.
Fantastic. Well, we're going to hear a little bit more about that later on. Let's start, though, with Israel, because The Guardian is reporting today that global leaders are trying to dissuade the country from increasing attacks on Lebanon. Now, this all goes back to an attack that happened on Saturday.
Yes, that's right. I mean, ever since October, there's been sort of near daily cross-border attacks between Israel and Hezbollah. It's led to the deaths of hundreds of people, and tens of thousands have been forced to move from their homes on both sides of that border. And it has been a building concern for the global community. And then on Saturday, a rocket attack in the Golan Heights hit a football pitch. It was thought that it was aimed for a bridge. This was an Iranian-made missile that Hezbollah believes fired. It killed, unfortunately, 12 children aged between 10 and 16 playing on that football pitch, and that has led to this huge escalation at the weekend of tensions. Benjamin Netanyahu, who was, of course, in America, cut his trip short. He's flown back to Israel, and he had emergency meetings with military and security officials and his government over the course of Sunday. But this has led to world leaders calling for restraint. Antony Blinken, who's currently in Japan, said we don't want to see any conflict escalation. We don't want to see this spread. And French President Emmanuel Macron, who's spoken to Benjamin Netanyahu, and saying France remains committed to doing everything to avoid a new escalation in the region. And that, of course, is the background whilst these talks go on to try and bring peace to Gaza as well. The head of the CIA, William Burns, is meeting currently in the Middle East with Qatari and Egyptian officials. and they are in Rome currently actually trying to hammer out this ceasefire agreement to try and sort of take the heat out of all of this. It was hoped that during the Olympics, the sort of usual Olympic ceasefire that's observed around the world might calm things down, but it doesn't seem that is the way of this conflict.
No. Let's turn our gaze now to the UK and the defeated Conservative Party. Now, they are obviously in the middle of this leadership race, although not everybody's declared yet. But one of the people who has is Kemi Badenoch, and she says that actually the public were right to vote them out.
Yeah, really interesting. Today is the deadline for Conservatives to put their nominations in. We're going to have a month-long contest because they want to try to make sure that they've got the right candidate. Now, they've got the likes of Priti Patel, who was the Home Secretary, Tom Tugendhat, Security Minister, James Cleverly. It is a busy field, Mel Stride as well. But Kemi Badenoch is the sort of hope of the right of the party. Now, she seems to have knocked out Suella Braverman, who's withdrawn from the race. And Kemi Badenoch has an interesting background. She is definitely not someone that you might have thought would lean towards the Conservative Party. She is born in southwest London. Her parents were Nigerian Yoruba. Her father was a doctor, her mother was a psychologist, a professor, and she lived between the US, Lagos, and the UK growing up. But she is very much saying in her pitch to the party that they got it wrong, that they've said that they were a right-of-centre party, but that they sort of governed for the last 10 years in a state of confusion and pandered to the left, that they need to adopt much more conservative policies. But it's really interesting when you look at this race because they're going to have a sort of a series of rounds. They're going to be whittled down to 4, and at their party conference in September, they're going to all battle it out at that conference. But then they still won't decide who the winner is until November 2nd. And the trouble for this party now is they've made a mistake in the past. Liz Truss, I think many voters, it seemed, said that she was the reason why they were voting the Conservatives out of office, the damage that she did to the economy and her erratic behaviour, which has continued now. She's in the US trying to turn herself into some sort of alt-right pundit. And I think this party is struggling to try and go back to a position where they have a sensible offer to the voters when the rest of the right around the world has sort of tacked into that very Trumpian, Viktor Orban type constant attack and culture wars, which have proved to be deeply unpopular in the United Kingdom. But that's something that Kemi Badenoch seems slightly curious and interested in compared to the other candidates.
Well, let's go from culture wars to customer wars. And this is a story in the New York Times about Japan. It's a fantastic story. Tell us more.
A really interesting story, and it documents lots of recent incidents in Japan. Of course, we know that they have famously great hospitality, that they're all about business services. But it seems as though politicians and businesses have had enough, particularly because the treatment being leveled out to their employees is so bad. And it talks about incidences where retailers have been forced to deal with real strange levels of abuse and what they call customer harassment now in Japan, to the point where they are looking at imposing a new law to make sure that the transactions between customer and businesses are not imbalanced anymore. And they're having to do things as well, like SoftBank is having to come up with a computer system which is going to emotion cancel the voice of incoming customers to try and make the interactions more pleasant for their staff because they've become so abusive. And just it seems people flying over off the handle since the pandemic on little tiny things, talking about a man in a ramen shop who he said he wasn't getting enough toppings delivered every time he asked. And so he sort of started pouring things out across the floor of the store. And then he engaged in a campaign of prank calls and ultimately received a fine. But some interesting battles with customers. We're seeing this somewhat around the world where people have stopped learning how to behave nicely towards staff. But in Japan, it seems it's gone further, with lots of businesses no longer giving the surnames of staff because they don't want them to be doxed online or bullied or harassed in that way too.
That's quite extraordinary. And there's all sorts of examples of staff being forced to kneel and apologise, and just horrific stories.
Yeah, that's right. And a lot of this as well being caught on camera, incidents in taxis where the driver's being berated and it's caught on the dash cam footage. An incident at a hot spa also caught on CCTV where customers turned up half an hour early They were wanting to access their room, and they were told, no, you must please just wait here in your car until your time. And it ends up with the owner of the establishment on his knees in the car park, begging them for forgiveness as they berate him, even though they were the ones that are early. It's quite extraordinary.
Quite extraudinary. Vinny, let's go back to Paris because, as you say, it's a party there. And indeed, Le Monde is saying that Paris is really is very happy, has embraced the spirit of the Olympics. But cameramen have been warned not to be sexist. Tell us a little bit more about that.
This is really fascinating because the Games are making a lot of song and dance, the IOC, about this being the first time in the 128-year history of the modern Games where they've got gender parity. And that means, you've got the same level of men and women athletes competing, but also they have rescheduled things to give more prominence to women competitors in primetime broadcasts, which is obviously a great thing. It's very welcome. Now, the thing with broadcasts is there has to be cameramen involved. And I still say cameramen because, I've been a journalist for 15 years. I can count on one hand the number of female camera operators I have ever worked with compared to the hundreds of men. It is still so dominated because, there is a lot of heavy equipment, particularly if you're carrying a Steadicam kit. It is quite hard physical labor to do. But for whatever reason, they aren't getting more women into that profession. Of course, lots of women strong enough to do that, but it is a male-dominated profession. But they've instructed the cameramen to be less sexist in their filming because they apparently were taking many more close-ups of the female athletes, focusing on particular parts of their anatomy as well, whereas male competitors, they were giving much wider shots. And so they've instructed the cameramen to not treat them any differently when it comes to the filming. They're saying there's unconscious bias in the way that they're doing it.
Extraordinary. Vincent McAviney, thank you very much indeed. And don't forget, we will be crossing to Paris at 8 a.m. London time. That's 9 a.m. in Paris to hear from Emma Nelson in our studio there. That's going to be operational for the next couple of weeks, broadcasting from the heart of the Olympics. Now, here's what else we're keeping an eye on today. Flights at Beirut airport have been cancelled or delayed, with Lebanon's Middle East Airlines saying disruptions to its schedule were related to insurance risks as tensions escalate between Israel and armed political group Hezbollah. A rocket strike that killed 12 teenagers and children in the Israeli-occupied Golan Heights on Saturday has added to concerns that Israel and the Iran-backed group could engage in a full-scale war. Foreign ministers from Australia, India, Japan and the United States, a grouping known as the Quad, met in Tokyo on Monday for talks expected to focus on maritime security and initiatives to build up cyber defences. US Secretary of State Antony Blinken met his Chinese counterpart Wang Yi in Laos on Saturday and repeated that Washington and its partners want to maintain a free and open Indo-Pacific, according to a US readout of the meeting. And President Tayyip Erdogan said yesterday that Turkey might enter Israel, as it had done in the past in Libya and Nagorno-Karabakh, though he didn't spell out what sort of intervention he was suggesting. There's no reason why we cannot do this. We must be strong so that we can take these steps, Erdogan added in a televised address. This is The Globalist. Stay tuned. It is 2:28 in Washington, 8:28 in Zurich. In 99 days, the United States will vote in the presidential election, most likely pitting the former prosecutor Kamala Harris against the convicted felon Donald Trump, whose divisive rhetoric is fueling his campaign. This is what he said on Friday.
We have to win this election, most important election ever. We want a landslide that's too big to rig. If you want to save America, get your friends, get your family, get everyone you know, and vote. Vote early, vote absentee, vote on election day. I don't care how, but you have to get out and vote. And again, Christians, get out and vote. Just this time. You won't have to do it anymore. 4 more years, you know what? It'll be fixed, it'll be fine. You won't have to vote anymore, my beautiful Christians. I love you, Christians. I'm a Christian. I love you. Get out. You got to get out and vote. In 4 years, you don't have to vote again. We'll have it fixed so good you're not going to have to vote.
Well, listening to that with me is Natasha Lindstedt, who's Professor of Government at the University of Essex. Natasha, what did he mean?
Well, that's horrifying. But he's probably going to act as if he was just saying you just need to vote this one time because I'm going to fix all your problems and you're not going to need to vote again. But the problem is he's been already telling the American public that he would be dictator for a day. He's connected to this horrendous project 2025, which wants to increase executive power and roll back women's reproductive rights and weaponize the justice system against enemies and basically create a propaganda machine with a public-supported media. And there's genuine fears that the U.S. is going to turn into some kind of semi-dictatorship. So we could interpret it different ways, but I interpret it to mean that elections are going to really cease having much meaning once he takes over. And I find that to be incredibly frightening.
So the attempted assassination gave him a bounce, but now the latest person he's attacked is the FBI director, Christopher Wray, for saying that it might have just been a bit of shrapnel. And I mean, this tallies with other pieces of information saying that the teleprompter shattered and it was a piece of that glass that hit Trump. Are we any closer to the truth on that?
It's very difficult to know whether or not they're going to find the truth. They were trying to even look at bullets to see if there was any DNA on it, his DNA on it. And unfortunately, this investigation has become very political. Something that should be very technical and apolitical has become political because even just suggesting that it was a piece of shrapnel, which could be very plausible, has been taken, Trump's team and Trump have taken offense to this because he wants everyone to think he was hit by a bullet because that makes him sound tougher, more like some sort of savior or messianic person or Superman. He doesn't like the idea that he was only hit by shrapnel.
Is he on the back foot now? I mean, his campaign was planned around contesting Joe Biden and attacking his age. Now it's likely to be Harris. That leaves Trump as the oldest candidate. Has he torn up his plans, and what will be his main focus now?
He and his campaign have been completely taken aback by what's happened in the Democratic Party, which has been nothing short of incredible. The speed with which Kamala Harris has taken over the campaign, taken the reins, and is the presumptive nominee. I'm surprised by how ill-prepared they are, given all the Republicans did and the Trump campaign did was criticize Joe Biden's age and make a case for the fact that he needed to step down. And so you would have thought that the writing was on the wall that might happen. But they have been floored by the fact that Kamala Harris, she didn't have a very good approval rating prior to becoming the presumptive nominee. She has earned more money. I mean, over 100 million, 126, or maybe it was 200 million, I think, in such a short time. And a lot of it is coming from just individual donors. So small donors, first-time donors, more and more people registering to vote. And all of Trump's campaign was about attacking Biden's age. And if Biden stayed in the race, he probably would have won, and that's all he needed to do. He's completely ill-prepared to deal with a candidate that has a lot of strengths, that's very sharp, and at this point, he doesn't even want to even debate her.
Mm-hmm. Who do you think she's going to choose then? Who will Kamala Harris choose as her running mate? What will be her calculations?
That's been such the big question, and from what we've been hearing, she wants to choose someone who has similar values to her that she knows that she can work with, but that also might be able to help her campaign and win the election. So you're hearing the names of Governor Josh Shapiro from Pennsylvania. They've known each other somewhat, and they get along really well. You hear Roy Cooper, governor of North Carolina. They've also known each other when they were both working as state attorney generals for North Carolina and California, respectively. And you're also hearing Senator from Arizona, Mark Kelly, who's a former astronaut, and who has a lot of knowledge about immigration policy. So those are the three names you're hearing. Also a little bit about the governor of Kentucky, Andy Beshear. So she seems most likely to choose a moderate Democrat, and someone who can go on the campaign trail and be really effective in challenging the Trumpism.
How important is the choice of running mate to American voters? Are they just looking at who's at the top of the ticket?
Typically, it's not important. We struggle to find an instance where it really, really mattered. You could maybe name in 2008 when John McCain chose Sarah Palin, and that was a really poor choice. I think we're seeing buyer's remorse with Trump's pick of J.D. Vance, that he's just been a disaster, and that he added literally nothing to the ticket. Now, in terms of Kamala Harris, who she chooses, I think any of those names I mentioned are going to be a good choice for her. Her bench is much deeper, but what we are seeing is the J.D. Vance choice has been a big mistake for Trump.
With the whole childless cat lady thing.
Exactly. Not helping. No.
Joe Biden still has 6 months in office, so the president, not Congress, directs foreign policy. I wonder if Biden, as Bush did in 1992 after losing to Clinton, could make some consequential decisions, particularly on Israel and Ukraine, which might indeed force the hand of his successor and leave a lasting legacy. I mean, is it too soon now to call him a lame duck president?
That's a really good question. I think he's still really motivated to get things done. He really loved being president and he loved leading the country. And as we know, he took a long time to decide that he didn't want to do that. I'm not sure what kind of moves that he can do with either the war going on in Ukraine or the war in Israel that he would be able to make any huge maneuvers. I know that, with the recent address to Congress of Netanyahu, and there's been increased pressure applied on Netanyahu to come up with some sort of to agree to a deal, to agree to a ceasefire, and to try to get the hostages home. But it's not clear that he can do anything that would be a huge change from what he's doing already.
Kamala is particularly strong on Israel. I mean, she's not entirely towing the party line there.
She's got a different tone in the way she talks about the conflict in Gaza and Israel. And she has been able to connect a little bit more with Arab American voters by the way she talks about the Palestinians, the human catastrophe and crisis that the Palestinians have faced in Gaza, and the way she has had, or at least demonstrated, quite a bit more compassion, that there's trauma on both sides. And maybe she feels more comfortable doing that for a variety of reasons, having learned a lot about the conflict as vice president. But she certainly connected much more with both Arab American voters on this front and also younger voters.
Now, she was backed by the Obamas this weekend. How much does high-level support of politicians and indeed celebrities actually help?
So I don't think that celebrity endorsements help very much. Having looked at, studies of this, they can help in getting the vote out, like Taylor Swift saying that people should register to vote. And on one day in one social media post, you saw 35,000 people registered to vote. So that can make a difference. I think the Obama endorsement matters. The Obamas are incredibly popular politicians within the Democratic Party and among even independents. And that really sealed the deal amongst the Democrats that this is really the candidate to vote for.
Natasha, thank you very much indeed. That's Natasha Lindstedt there. And this is The Globalist on Monocle Radio. So as the US prepares for November's presidential election, one of the trends of recent years has been southern Republican-led states such as Texas celebrating faster-growing populations than their northern neighbours. But now some northern states are fighting back. Hilary Doe is the state of Michigan's first ever Chief Growth Officer. She spoke with Monocle's US editor Chris Lord, and she began by describing why her job is necessary.
Michigan's the first state in the nation to name a chief growth officer. And what that means, the task at hand, is for us to tackle, population growth and, of course, with it, economic growth. Michigan's one of about 34% of states across the U.S. that have been seeing population stagnation or declines. So a widespread challenge that lots of states are facing, but Michigan's been, the first to step up, take it on, and say that we're going to tackle it. And really the task at hand, the way that we're thinking about it, is ensuring that we're building a value prop that works for young folks, that we can retain and attract, young people to our state and keep our workers, to make sure that we're filling, our talent gaps and building an economy that works for, the 21st century. And we've done over this last, 8-9 months, an incredible amount of public engagement across our state, sitting with thousands and thousands of Michiganders, asking them what they love about this place and also what could be between them and building, their future here. And also an incredible amount of comparative research about Michigan and maybe some of our faster growing peer states, for example, to ensure that we have that, kind of first mover advantage and information, so that when we're building a growth agenda here in Michigan, it's informed by all of that information.
And so when you talk to people about why they're leaving, what do you hear? Is it as simple as, the unfortunate old adage of old and cold? It's that Michigan up there, in those northern states is a sort of colder place than you might find if you head south and go into Miami, for instance, for opportunity. Or is it about jobs? What are they looking for? Is it taxes and jobs, or is it quality of life? What is it that they're in search of when they leave Michigan?
Sure. So really, like I said, most of the states that have been struggling with, population stagnation and declines face a really similar challenge. In the U.S., Sunbelt weather trends have really driven population growth for a long time. So we've been seeing, the same states been, kind of gaining population over the last handful of decades. And when we talk to folks and have done these surveys, we even did national polling, cities growing among young folks 18 to 34 across the country. And what we're hearing from folks is they really want, kind of a package of offerings, to your point, that add up to a really great quality of life. So great opportunities, great places, with place being just as important, arguably, as job opportunity, and also welcoming communities. And Michigan, as it relates to those things, actually fares quite well on quite a number of those areas. In terms of opportunities, Michigan is growing a fair amount as it relates to job opportunities. Currently, for example, we actually have talent gaps. So, we have employers who are hiring, and we actually have jobs we need to fill. It's part of the reason that we've launched the largest talent attraction effort of any state in the nation here, because we really need folks to stay and to be attracted to Michigan to fill those roles. We also obviously have a lot of natural beauty and really diverse cities, so a lot to offer on the place side of things. And as you probably well know, our governor's taken incredible strides in terms of ensuring Michigan's a welcoming place, in terms of rights protections and things like that, to ensure everyone feels welcome here. So what we see is actually quite good retention relative to some of our neighboring states, but some work to do as it relates to attraction. So when we think about our task here in Michigan, we know that, if you love a place, you should work to make it better and better. So we're building a policy agenda to keep making our value prop here in Michigan, those great opportunities, great places, and welcoming communities better and better. And we're putting, some of those policy learnings to work. But we're also thinking about the marketing challenge and the storytelling work we have to do to ensure folks across the country and around the world know about Michigan and think about Michigan when they're thinking about, a great place to call home and an affordable place that offers that great quality of life.
I want to get into the storytelling in just a moment, because I think that's really interesting. But, when you look across, you mentioned the Sunbelt cities, and in a way, what they're offering in some cases, very bluntly about it, is no or low taxes on income, plentiful potential tech jobs quite often, but jobs, and then in some cases, cheaper rents. And I think of, for instance, California, people leaving there in search of other things, in search of other lifestyles. Quite often that's the draw. How do you compete with that as Michigan up there with so much history, but also so much challenges over the last few years?
Yeah. So, to sort of take those bit by bit, like I mentioned, we did a lot of comparative analysis and work. Like, we do have this first mover advantage. So we tried to take that opportunity and make sure that we were digging in and looking at those faster growing places, and sort of piece by piece really examined an incredible number of variables among those faster growing places. And we saw, some of them do have, for example, maybe lower tax base, but a lot of our faster growing peer states might have higher tax incidence than Michigan does, for example. We're currently 46 out of 50 in the nation in terms of combined local, state, and tax burden here in Michigan. So you can kind of, see that falling on either side of the equation. What we found that all our faster growing peers actually had in common, though, were nice, high, and rising median incomes, often driven by growing knowledge economy sectors and the ability to, retain their entrepreneurs and grow those innovation economies. So we've really focused here in Michigan on investing there. We recently leaned in and the governor announced an innovation fund here and an intention to invest more in our entrepreneurs. We are a top 10 state for patents, and we want to keep those folks here in Michigan and commercialize those companies here as a means of driving that growth. We also saw our faster growing peer states have, nice high post-secondary outcomes and higher credentialing. That's really critical to growth in this era and connecting folks to our 21st century economy. So we're leaning in there and taking big strides on education. And the third is that you'll see, irrespective of sort of which state is growing, often the metropolitan area driving their growth is sort of a nice, walkable, transit-rich community. And often those places, tend to be, as you were saying, as it relates to rents, unfortunately have been really skyrocketing in terms of rents and challenging in terms of affordability.
And that was Michigan's Chief Growth Officer, Hilary Doe. You can read the full story in Monocle magazine's Summer Quality of Life issue on newsstands today. You're with Monocle Radio.
UBS has over 900 investment analysts from over 100 different countries.
Over 900 of the sharpest minds and freshest thinkers in the world of finance today.
To find out how we could help you,
contact us at ubs.com.
Now, let's speak to Isabel Hilton, who's a China expert and a visiting professor at King's College London, for a roundup of the news coming out of Asia. Good morning to you, Isabel.
Good morning. Good morning.
Can we start with the Asean conference, please?
Yes, it's been a very busy diplomatic weekend for China. ASEAN, Association of Southeast Asian States, had quite a lot on its agenda for its meetings. The South China Sea tensions, the Myanmar, where there's a continued fighting with rebel groups on the border, and there's just a lot of tension around. It was a well-attended meeting. Blinken flew in, China's Foreign Minister Wang Yi flew in, and they were having side meetings. The thing about ASEAN is that it doesn't tend to come to kind of big dramatic decisions, but it is the regional forum in which these issues do get at least they get aired. And it was interesting to note that in advance of the meeting, China and the Philippines came to a sort of a bit of a halt in hostilities, I would say. If you remember, the Philippines, it's part of the great territorial disputes in the South China Sea, and the Philippines is defending part of its maritime real estate by dint of beaching a beached ship called the Sierra Madre, which is a very ancient and rusting hulk, which they resupply with Philippine military personnel in order to say this is the Philippines. China was very aggressively blocking that resupply for weeks on end. We're using big water cannon, very dangerous stuff. And last week they agreed to allow a resupply. They haven't agreed to allow it to be repaired, but it is at least a toning down in the confrontation. So I think that's a sign that when an ASEAN meeting is coming up, it does affect the chemistry in the region, even if you can't look to ASEAN for, as I say, big dramatic decisions.
Now, another person who was at that meeting was the Russian Foreign Minister, Sergei Lavrov, and he met with Wang Yi. They were talking about cooperating to promote regional peace and stability. Is that a bit ominous that Russia and China are kind of looking to do that together?
Well, indeed, whenever Russia talks about peace, I think we need to be very worried indeed. I think it's part of the attraction of the relationship with China is that it does allow Russia to take part in diplomatic meetings from which it would otherwise be excluded. And that, makes it seem as though Russia is still in a normal diplomatic situation, which it's not. China, as we know, objects strongly to what it sees as new military alliances being formed in the region, led by the United States. And this is partly accounted to that. Throughout the Ukraine war, the war in Ukraine, China and Russia have continued to do joint military drills. And these are largely aimed at Japan. Common hostility there. There are islands that are disputed between China and Japan, indeed between Russia and Japan. So, they certainly flex their muscles. And the Chinese position is that they are for general peace and goodwill in international relations. And the United States is constantly forming what are aggressive pacts and military arrangements. So I think that this is a kind of reiteration of that, and to remind everyone that Russia remains a player and has China's back should China need to concentrate its forces, let's say, in the Taiwan Strait.
Mm-hmm. Now, Giorgia Meloni, Italy's leader, is in China right now. They're putting together, they're wanting to relaunch ties.
Yes, and this is part of there's quite a lot of moving parts in European relations with China at the moment. And Italy stands out because Italy was the only EU country that had joined China's Belt and Road, that great initiative launched in 2013, but pretty much played out by now. But having joined Belt and Road, Giorgia Meloni Italy having joined Belt and Road, Meloni then withdrew, and relations were pretty frosty. Both sides would like a reset. China has been playing very nicely with the European Union recently because it needs inward investment. It needs to counterbalance the increasingly hostile rhetoric with the United States. And Meloni, though Italy was very disappointed in the Belt and Road deal because there was really, no investment followed. So she's trying to get Chinese investments, particularly in areas where China is going to have to build factories abroad to avoid European tariffs, and that is particularly in electric vehicles. So after the European Union investigated the subsidies in the whole supply chain for Chinese electric vehicles, they announced major tariffs. China is building big factories in Morocco and particularly in Hungary to be inside the European Union. And I think Meloni wants some of that action. We'll have a declaration rather than action.
Let's stick with the EU because they are resisting Commission plans to screen private investment in China.
Yes, well, that's Germany in particular. So as part of the more robust approach that Ursula von der Leyen has led vis-à-vis China, in addition to screening inward investment from China for security reasons and for reasons of avoiding dependency, there is a proposal from the Commission that investment from European countries into China should also be screened for security reasons. So to avoid a transfer of particularly sensitive intellectual property and so on and so forth. Now, this is beginning to meet resistance, particularly from Germany. And Germany is always the problem as the European Union tries to get tough on China. Germany, which has the biggest economic stake in China in both directions, is the resistor. And there's beginning to be, not only from Germany, but Germany is leading it. Germany is arguing that the investments into China make the German economy more secure, they promote prosperity, and it's really not the European Commission's business to screen them. So that's another kind of, another of the really quite complicated set of considerations that are going on between the EU and China at present.
And finally as well, tell us about this typhoon.
Well, it's typhoon season, I'm afraid, and but Taiwan and South China have been hit quite badly. It's been precipitating landslides. South China has always been on typhoon track, and the pattern of what happens when these typhoon hits is rather wearily familiar. It causes flooding, it causes landslides. There have been quite a large number of deaths, and of course, with climate change, this is just going to get worse. China is highly vulnerable to this kind of weather. What the government does in these circumstances is to emphasize the rescue. So, images of PLA coming to the rescue of villages. It's a really bad typhoon. Images of destroyed villages in Hunan, for example, 15 dead, in lots of places have been hit. And as I say, what the government tries to emphasize is not the vulnerability, but the fact that the government is quick on the rescue.
Isabel Hilton, many thanks for joining us. And that's all for today's programme. Thanks to our producers, Angelica Jobson and Chris Chermack, our researcher, Sana Jumani, and our studio manager, Mariella Bevan. Coming up at the top of the hour is the first edition of Monocle in Paris. The briefing is live at midday in London, and the Globalist returns at the same time tomorrow. I'm Georgina Godwin. Thank you for listening.